My sister stood before the bench and announced, "Finally, your house is mine." Behind her, our parents applauded like they were at an awards ceremony, but the chills running down my spine didn't come from her arrogance. They came when the judge froze, staring at a single document. She looked up, locked eyes with me, and asked one question that turned the entire courtroom to ice, instantly shattering the victory my family thought they had secured years ago. My name is Sloan Mercer, and as I stood in the center of the distinctively stale air of the Travis County Civil Courthouse, I realized that my family did not actually see me. To them, I was not a person with a pulse or a future or a threshold for pain. I was an obstacle. I was a speed bump on the road to their financial salvation, a minor inconvenience that needed to be paved over so the real protagonist of the Mercer family saga could finally claim her prize. That protagonist was currently standing 5 feet to my left. Blythe, my older sister, smoothed the front of her cream-colored pencil skirt, a garment that I knew cost more than $400 because I had seen the charge on a credit card statement she had accidentally left on my kitchen counter 3 months ago. She tossed her hair back, looked directly at the Honorable Judge Marin Holloway, and delivered her line with the kind of theatrical projection usually reserved for a Broadway stage. "Finally," Blythe said, her voice trembling with a practiced mixture of relief and victimhood. "Finally, your house is mine." It was not a whisper, it was a declaration. It was the sound of someone who believed that the universe owed her a happy ending simply because she had shown up to collect it. Behind her, in the second row of the gallery, my parents broke the cardinal rule of courtroom decorum. Gordon and Marianne Mercer started to clap. It was not a polite golf clap, nor was it the hesitant applause of people unsure if they were allowed to make noise. It was the enthusiastic, vindicated applause of two people watching their golden child receive a diploma. My mother actually dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, nodding at the back of Blythe's head as if to say, "We did it, baby. We took back what the world tried to keep from you." The bailiff stepped forward, his hand drifting toward his belt, clearly ready to silence the outburst. But the sheer audacity of the moment seemed to stun everyone into a brief, paralyzed silence. Even Blythe's attorney, a slick man in a navy suit who charged $300 an hour to feed my sister's delusions, looked down at his shoes, visibly uncomfortable with the premature celebration. I stood perfectly still. I am 36 years old. I have spent the last 15 years building a career in project management at Northbridge Civic Partners. I manage multi-million-dollar budgets. I negotiate with contractors who think they can bully me because I am a woman. I know how to hold my ground when the floor is shaking. But in this room, to the 3 people who share my DNA, I was invisible. I was just the villain in the story they had been telling themselves for years. They looked at me and saw defeat. They saw the quiet Sloan, the obedient Sloan, the Sloan who would rather swallow glass than cause a scene. They thought my silence was submission. They thought my lack of visible emotion was proof that I had accepted my fate, that I was ready to sign the deed over to Blythe and apologize for the inconvenience of having owned property in the first place. They were wrong. My silence was not surrender. It was the silence of a hunter who knows the trap has already been sprung and is simply waiting for the prey to realize they are caught. "Order," Judge Holloway said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of 20 years on the bench. She did not bang her gavel. She did not need to. The tone of her voice was enough to slice through the air and sever the connection between my parents' hands. The clapping died instantly, replaced by the humming of the air conditioning and the shuffling of papers. My father, Gordon, cleared his throat loudly, a sound that usually signaled he was about to lecture a waiter or a customer service representative. But here, under the fluorescent lights of the Texas legal system, it just sounded small. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer," the judge said, not looking up from the file spread out before her. "This is a court of law, not a theater. If you disrupt these proceedings again, I will have you removed. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," my father muttered, sinking lower in his seat. Blythe remained standing, her chin tilted up. She was glowing. She looked at me out of the corner of her eye, a smirk touching her lips. It was a look I knew well. It was the look she gave me when we were 7 and 10. Right after she broke our mother's favorite vase and placed the shards in my bed. It was the look that said, I win, and you lose, because that is the natural order of things. I did not look back at her. I kept my eyes fixed on Judge Holloway. The judge was flipping through the case file. Her movements were rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Flip, scan, flip, scan. We were at the end of the hearing. The arguments had been made. Blythe's lawyer had painted a tragic portrait of a fragile older sister taken advantage of by a cold, calculating younger sibling who had tricked her out of her inheritance. My lawyer, Graham Lyle, had presented the cold, hard facts of my sole ownership. Now, we were just waiting for the gavel to fall. But then, the rhythm broke. Judge Holloway's hand stopped. It was a subtle shift, one that might have gone unnoticed by anyone who wasn't paying close attention. But I was paying attention. I was paying attention to every micro-expression in that room. The judge had been turning a page, but she froze mid-motion. Her brows, which had been smooth and impassive for the last 2 hours, suddenly knitted together. She leaned forward, adjusting her reading glasses, and peered closer at a specific document near the bottom of the stack. The air in the room changed. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The boredom that usually permeates civil proceedings evaporated, replaced by a sharp, electric tension. Judge Holloway moved her finger down the page. She read a line, then she read it again. She looked up, but not at the room in general. She looked at the date on the wall calendar, then back down at the paper. Then she flipped the page over to look at the back, then to the front again. It was the reaction of someone who had just found a spider in a salad. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was a mixture of confusion and sudden, sharp alertness. She had seen something that did not belong, something that defied the logic of the narrative she had been fed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a slow, heavy thud. Here it is, I thought, the loose thread. Ms. Mercer, Judge Holloway said. Blythe stepped forward immediately, beaming. She smoothed her skirt again, ready to accept the judgment she felt she was owed. Yes, Your Honor. The judge did not look at her. Judge Holloway slowly turned her head. Her eyes bypassed Blythe entirely. They bypassed Blythe's expensive lawyer. They bypassed my parents in the gallery. They landed, with the weight of an anchor, directly on me. Not you, Ms. Blythe Mercer, the judge said, her voice devoid of the warmth she had shown earlier when listening to Blythe's tearful testimony about her emotional distress. Blythe's smile faltered. It didn't disappear completely, but the edges curled inward, like a wilting flower. She looked confused. Excuse me? I am addressing the defendant, Judge Holloway said, still locking eyes with me. Sloane Mercer. I took a half step forward. Yes, Your Honor. My voice was steady. I had practiced this moment in the shower, in my car, in the empty hallways of the house on Rue Magnolia that my family was trying to steal. I had practiced being the calm in the center of their chaos. The entire courtroom went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the vending machine in the hallway outside. I have a question, the judge said. She placed her palm flat on the open file, covering the document she had just been scrutinizing. Before I render a final judgment on the ownership of the property at 412 Rue Magnolia, there is a discrepancy here that I need to resolve. Blythe let out a short, nervous laugh. A discrepancy? But, Your Honor, we submitted the signed agreement. Sloane admitted. Quiet, the judge snapped. Blythe's mouth snapped shut with an audible click. My parents shifted in their seats, the wood creaking loudly. The celebratory atmosphere from 30 seconds ago had vanished, sucked out of the room by the sudden gravity in the judge's demeanor. I watched Blythe's face. The confidence was cracking, for the first time all day. She looked unsure. She looked at her lawyer, but he was frowning, frantically flipping through his own copy of the massive binder of evidence, trying to figure out what page the judge was looking at. He didn't know. He couldn't know. The truth is, my family has always operated on a script. In the Mercer family play, Blythe is the star. She is the fragile, brilliant, beautiful princess who deserves the world, but is constantly victimized by circumstance. My parents are the devoted guardians who will do anything to protect her. And I am the stagehand. I am the understudy who is never meant to go on stage. I am the one who pays the bills, fixes the messes, and stays in the shadows. I am supposed to be reliable, dull, and ultimately sacrificial. When they sued me for my house, the house my grandmother left to me, the house I restored with my own 2 hands, they assumed I would follow the script. They assumed I would fold under the pressure. They assumed I would sign the settlement to keep the peace, because that is what Sloane does. Sloane keeps the peace. Sloane absorbs the pain so Blythe doesn't have to. They never considered that the stagehand might have rewritten the 3rd act while they were busy taking bows. I looked at my parents. My mother's face was pale, her hands clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. My father looked angry, his jaw set, as if the judge was a customer who had declined his credit card. They didn't understand. They thought they were the authors of this reality. They didn't realize they were just characters in a scene I had set up for them. Judge Holloway lifted her hand from the document. She picked up the piece of paper, holding it by the very corner as if it were contaminated evidence in a murder trial. The paper crinkled in the silence. She looked at Blythe's lawyer, then at Blythe, and finally, she turned her gaze back to me. There was a strange expression on her face now. It wasn't just suspicion. It was the look of a woman who realizes she has been invited to participate in a lie, and she is offended by the invitation. This document, the judge said, waving the paper slightly, this shared ownership agreement that the plaintiff claims was signed 3 years ago. Yes, Blythe said, her voice breathless, desperate to reclaim the narrative. Sloane signed it. She promised me half the house. We have the signature. The judge lowered the paper. She leaned over the bench, her eyes narrowing until they were sharp slits behind her glasses. I am not asking if she signed it, Ms. Mercer, the judge said. Her voice dropped an octave, becoming dangerous. I am asking about the provenance of this physical piece of paper. Blythe blinked. I don't understand. It is a simple question, Judge Holloway said. She looked at the timestamp on the bottom of the page, then looked up, scanning the faces of everyone in the room. Her gaze lingered on my father, then my mother, and finally rested heavily on my sister. Who submitted this document to the court? The judge asked, her words falling like stones into deep water, because whoever did just made a very serious mistake. To understand why a judge staring at a piece of paper in a Texas courtroom felt like a guillotine blade hovering over my sister's neck, you have to understand the architecture of my family. It was not built on love or mutual respect. It was built on a very specific casting call, and the roles were assigned before I could even speak. Blythe was the star. I was the audience. Growing up, the mythology of Blythe was recited at every dinner party and family gathering. She was the spirited one. She was the firecracker. When she threw a tantrum in a grocery store because she wanted a candy bar, my father, Gordon, would laugh and say she had executive potential because she knew what she wanted. When she failed a math test, my mother, Mary Ann, would soothe her by saying that creative minds like hers were too vast to be contained by simple arithmetic. Blythe was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets lucky enough to be caught in her gravity. I, on the other hand, was the steady one. Sloane is so manageable, my mother would tell her friends while sipping Chardonnay on the patio. She's like a good pair of beige flats, practical, reliable. You never have to worry about her. It sounded like a compliment, but even at 10 years old, I knew it wasn't. Manageable meant I required zero investment. Steady meant I had no needs. While Blythe's emotional landscape was treated like a precious, volatile ecosystem that needed constant monitoring, mine was treated like a parking lot, functional, dull, and meant to be walked over. The dynamic was subtle at first, manifesting in small thefts that were dismissed as sharing. It started with toys, then clothes, then identity. I remember my 16th birthday. I had saved my allowance for 6 months to buy a specific vintage denim jacket I had found at a thrift store. It was oversized, embroidered with flowers on the back, and it was the first thing I had ever owned that felt entirely me. 2 days after I bought it, I came home from school to find it gone. When I walked into the kitchen, Blythe was wearing it. She was leaning against the counter, eating an apple, sleeves rolled up. "Take it off," I said. My voice was shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer exhaustion of anticipation. I knew how this would go. Blythe didn't even look up. "Relax, Sloane. I just needed it for my art class presentation. It fits my aesthetic better than yours anyway." "It is mine," I said, reaching for the collar. "I bought it." "Mom!" Blythe shouted, shrinking away as if I had struck her. My mother appeared instantly, as if summoned by a spell. She took one look at the scene, Blythe clutching the apple and looking wide-eyed and innocent, me standing there with my fists clenched, and the verdict was delivered before the trial began. "Sloane, honestly," my mother sighed, rubbing her temples. "Why are you always so aggressive?" "She stole my jacket," I said, pointing. "Borrowed," my father corrected, walking in from the living room. "Sisters borrow things. It is part of growing up." "She didn't ask," I argued, "and she won't give it back." "I will give it back later," Blythe said, smoothing the denim. "Sloane is just being weirdly possessive. It is just a jacket." "It is just a jacket," my mother echoed. She looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and fatigue. "Why do you have to be so difficult, Sloane? Your sister is having a stressful week with her exams. Can't you just be the bigger person? You are always so sensitive. You make everything into a crisis." That was the refrain of my youth. "You are so sensitive. You are so difficult. Why can't you just let it go?" Any attempt to draw a boundary was framed as an attack on the family unit. If I defended myself, I was causing drama. If I asked for my property back, I was stingy. I learned very quickly that in the Mercer household, the truth did not matter. What mattered was maintaining the comfort of the golden child. So I stopped talking. I retreated. I learned that silence was the only shield I had. If I didn't speak, they couldn't twist my words. If I didn't show attachment to things, they couldn't enjoy taking them away. I became a gray rock. I studied hard. I kept my room spotless, and I hid the things I truly cared about in a lockbox under the floorboards of my closet. I survived my adolescence by becoming invisible. The only person who actually saw me, was Aunt June. June was my grandmother's younger sister. She was a chain smoker with a gravelly voice and a sharp wit who had never married and lived in a small, clutter-filled apartment downtown. My parents tolerated her because she was family, but they thought she was crude. I thought she was wonderful. One afternoon, when I was 18, I was sitting on June's porch, fuming. Blythe had taken the car I was supposed to use to get to my part-time job, causing me to be late and nearly fired. My parents had, naturally, blamed me for not coordinating better with my sister. June took a long drag of her cigarette and blew the smoke toward the magnolia tree in her yard. "You know what your problem is, kid?" she asked. "I was born into the wrong family?" I suggested. June laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Well, that too. But your problem is that you think you can win an argument with people who don't care about logic. Your parents and that sister of yours? They run on emotion. They rewrite history to make themselves feel good. You can't fight that with words." She leaned in, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. "You fight that with paper," she said. "Paper?" "Receipts, contracts, dates, times," June said, tapping the table with a manicured fingernail. "People can lie. They can cry and say they didn't mean it. They can say you're crazy. But a piece of paper with a signature and a date? That doesn't have feelings. That doesn't care if it hurts your feelings. It just is. You want to survive that house? You keep your receipts. Sloane, you document everything, and you never, ever let them know you are doing it." I took that advice and buried it deep in my marrow. I went to college on a scholarship because my parents had spent the college fund on Blythe's gap year in Europe, a trip that was supposed to help her find herself, but mostly resulted in a lot of credit card debt and a fake British accent that lasted 3 months. After graduation, I moved out immediately. I got a job at Northbridge Civic Partners, a firm specializing in urban planning and project management. It was perfect for me. My job was to take chaotic, messy situations and impose order upon them. I was good at it. I was excellent at it. While I was climbing the corporate ladder, getting certifications, and building a 401k, Blythe was living her truth. She bounced between jobs, interior design, life coaching, boutique retail, never staying anywhere longer than 6 months. She got married to a man named Rick, a guy who peaked in high school and thought buying rounds of drinks for strangers was a personality trait. My parents paid for the wedding. Of course, it cost $40,000. I was the maid of honor, which meant I was the unpaid wedding planner. I organized the vendors. I soothed the tantrums, and I smiled when Blythe made a toast thanking our parents for always believing in her, without once mentioning the $3,000 I had quietly covered for the catering deposit when her card was declined. Blythe loved to play the role of the mature, settled adult. She posted photos of her hubby and their leased BMW on social media with captions about blessed life. But behind the scenes, the calls to me never stopped. Sloan, can I borrow $500? Rick's commission check is late. Sloan, can you talk to Mom? She is being so annoying about Sunday dinner. Sloan, I need you to co-sign this lease. My credit score is just a little low because of a mistake the bank made. I usually said no to the money, which made me cold. I usually stayed out of the arguments, which made me distant, but I kept working, I kept saving, and I kept listening to Aunt June's voice in my head. Keep the paper. When I bought my first car, I kept the title in a fireproof safe. When I rented my first apartment, I scanned the lease and saved it to the cloud. I created a digital trail of my existence, a fortress of facts that no one could gaslight away. Then 3 years ago, the phone rang. It was my fur. His voice was somber, but there was an undercurrent of something else, anxiety, maybe, or just the hassle of having to deal with something unpleasant. It is your grandmother, he said. She passed away an hour ago. I felt a hollow ache in my chest. Grandma had been distant, lost in the fog of dementia for the last 5 years, but she had been kind in her own way. She was the one who had introduced me to June. I will be there, I said. Good, my father said. We need to get the funeral sorted quickly, and, well, we need to deal with the estate. Blythe is already upset about the antique vanity. You know how much she loved it. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall of my office at Northbridge. I didn't cry. I just felt a strange, heavy shifting in the atmosphere. It felt like the pressure drop before a hurricane. Blythe wanted the vanity. My parents wanted the process to be over so they could get back to their country club schedule. None of them knew what was actually in the will. I did. Aunt June had told me 2 years prior, right before she moved to a retirement community in Florida. Your grandmother isn't as senile as they think, June had whispered. She knows who visits, she knows who calls, and she knows who asks for money. The death of my grandmother was a period at the end of a long, sad sentence, but as I packed my black dress and drove toward my childhood home, I realized it wasn't just an ending. It was the opening line of a new chapter, one where the steady, manageable Sloan was about to become the most dangerous person in the room. Because Grandma hadn't left the house to the family. She hadn't left it to the golden child. She had left it to me. And that was a deviation from the script that the Mercer family was simply not equipped to handle. The reading of my grandmother's will was a short, dry affair, held in a lawyer's office that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old leather. There were no dramatic gasps, mostly because my family had already mentally divvied up her assets long before her heart stopped beating. Blythe expected the jewelry and the cash. My parents expected the rest of the portfolio. When the attorney, Mr. Henderson, read the clause regarding the property at 412 Rue Magnolia, the room went quiet. To my granddaughter, Sloane Mercer, I leave my residence and the plot of land on Rue Magnolia, to be hers and hers alone, free of any trust or guardianship." Blythe actually laughed. It was a sharp, incredulous sound. She turned to me, her eyes scanning my face for a reaction. "The bungalow?" she asked. "She left you the bungalow? That place is falling apart. It is practically a teardown." "It is a solid house," I said quietly. "It is a money pit," Blythe corrected, shaking her head as if she pitied me. "The roof leaks. The wiring is probably from the 1950s. You are going to spend more fixing it than it is worth. Honestly, Sloane, you should probably just sell the lot to a developer and cut your losses. I bet you could get $50,000 for the land if you are lucky." My father leaned forward, clasping his hands on the mahogany table. "Blythe has a point. Sloane, owning real estate is a massive liability. Taxes, insurance, maintenance. It is a lot for a single person to handle, especially with your work schedule." Then came the pivot, the maneuver they always use to strip me of autonomy under the guise of assistance. "Tell you what," my mother said, her voice soft and coaxing. "Why don't we put Blythe's name on the deed with yours? Just for safety. Blythe is so good with paperwork, and she has more time to deal with contractors. It would protect you. Honey, if something happens, you have a backup." I looked at them. I looked at Blythe, who was checking her cuticles, clearly bored by the prospect of acquiring a dump, but willing to accept the asset if it was handed to her. They didn't want the house because they loved it. They wanted control. They wanted to ensure that if the house ever did become valuable, they already had a foot in the door. "No," I said. The word hung in the air. "Excuse me?" my father said, his brow furrowing. "No," I repeated. "Grandma left it to me, not to us, to me. I will handle the taxes. I will handle the repairs. I will keep it in my name." My mother sighed, the long-suffering exhale of a martyr. "We are just trying to help you. Sloane, you do not have to be so defensive." But I did have to be defensive. I signed the papers that day as the sole owner. I took the keys, 3 heavy brass keys on a faded red ribbon, and I drove straight to Rue Magnolia. The house was not a palace. It was a modest, 2-bedroom craftsman bungalow built in 1924. It sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees that had buckled the sidewalks over the decades. The paint was peeling, revealing gray wood beneath the yellow siding. The porch sagged slightly to the left. The front yard was a jungle of overgrown azaleas and weeds. But when I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, I didn't smell decay. I smelled potential. The floors were original heart pine, hidden under filthy beige carpet. The windows were tall and framed in thick molding. It was sturdy. It had bones. And more importantly, it was the one place on earth where I did not have to ask permission to exist. For the next 2 years, that house became my second job, my sanctuary, and my obsession. Blythe was right about one thing. It was expensive, but she was wrong about it being a waste. I poured every spare dollar I earned at Northbridge Civic Partners into that structure. I didn't hire a general contractor to manage the whole thing because I couldn't afford the 20% markup. Instead, I became the general contractor. I learned the language of the trade. I learned that you do not pay a plumber until the pressure test holds. I learned the difference between load-bearing walls and partition walls. I learned how to apply for permits at the city clerk's office, standing in line at 7 in the morning with a thermos of coffee, waiting for a stamped approval. I spent my evenings and weekends covered in drywall dust and paint. I rented a floor sander and spent 3 consecutive days vibrating my arms numb to strip away decades of varnish, revealing the glowing amber wood beneath. I learned to tile a backsplash, watching instructional videos on my phone and cutting the ceramic pieces on a wet saw I bought secondhand. And true to Aunt June's advice, I documented everything. I bought a thick 3-ring binder. Every time I went to the hardware store, the receipt went into a plastic sleeve. Every time I paid a laborer, I made them sign a receipt book. When I hired a licensed electrician to rewire the kitchen, because I knew my limits, I kept the contract, the invoice, and the copy of his license. I took photos. I took pictures of the rotten subfloor before I replaced it. I took pictures of the new insulation before the drywall went up. I took pictures of the date-stamped permits taped to the front window. I created a digital archive, scanning every piece of paper and uploading it to a cloud drive with two-factor authentication. I wasn't just renovating a house, I was building a fortress of evidence. I was creating a timeline that proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, whose sweat was in the mortar and whose money was in the walls. During those 2 years, my family was noticeably absent. They came by exactly once, about 6 months in. The house was a construction zone, filled with dust and the noise of a saw. Blythe walked in, wrinkled her nose, and refused to take off her heels. "God, it smells like mold in here," she said, stepping gingerly over a roll of carpet padding. "I don't know how you live like this. Sloan, it is so depressing." "It is a process," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. "It is a waste," my father declared, looking at the exposed studs in the hallway. "You are throwing good money after bad. You should have sold the land." "Are you going to offer me a drink?" my mother asked, looking around the kitchen, which currently had no countertops. "I have water from the hose," I said. "The fridge is unplugged." They left after 15 minutes. They didn't ask about my plans. They didn't ask if I needed help painting. They didn't ask how I was paying for it. They saw a mess, and because it wasn't a shiny, finished product that reflected well on them, they wanted nothing to do with it. That silence was a gift. It meant I could work without their criticism. It meant the house was truly mine. But time is a funny thing in real estate. It moves slowly, and then all at once. About 3 years after I took ownership, the neighborhood began to change. The city announced a massive revitalization project for the downtown corridor, which was only 6 blocks away. A major tech company announced they were building a satellite campus 2 miles east. Suddenly, the quiet, forgotten streets of Rue Magnolia were buzzing. Food trucks started parking on the corners. A boutique coffee shop opened in the old gas station. Young professionals with strollers and dogs started buying the dilapidated houses next door and fixing them up. One Saturday morning, while I was planting hydrangeas in the front yard, now neatly landscaped and mulched, a car pulled up. It was a sleek, black sedan. A woman in a blazer stepped out and handed me a card. She was a real estate agent. "I have a client who is very interested in this property," she said. "We know it is not listed, but they are willing to make a cash offer." "I am not selling," I said, patting the dirt around the root ball. "They are prepared to offer $450,000, she said. I paused. That was nearly 10 times what Blythe had estimated the land was worth. "No, thank you," I said. $500,000, she countered. "As is, you wouldn't have to do another thing." "It is my home," I said, standing up and brushing the soil from my knees. "It is not for sale." The agent left, but the knowledge stayed. The valuation of the neighborhood was skyrocketing. My money pit had become a gold mine. I had turned a rundown shack into a jewel box, and the market had caught up to my vision. I didn't tell my family. I didn't want them to know. I wanted to enjoy my peace a little longer. But secrets like that do not stay buried in a town like Austin. Property tax assessments are public record. Zillow estimates are accessible to anyone with a smartphone. 2 weeks after the realtor visited, my phone rang on a Tuesday night. It was my mother. "Sloan, darling," she exclaimed, her voice pitching up in that artificial register she used when she wanted something. "We were just talking about you. It has been so long since we all had dinner." And Blythe was saying, well, she was saying how much she misses her little sister. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, staring at it. And my mother continued, "We heard you finally finished the house. We are so proud of you. We really need to come see it. In fact, Blythe suggested we have a little housewarming party this weekend, just the family, to celebrate our success." Our success. The word hung there, heavy and presumptuous. I looked around my living room. I looked at the crown molding I had installed myself. I looked at the fireplace I had restored, tile by tile. I looked at the binder on the shelf, thick with the paper trail of my labor. "Sure," I said, my voice flat. "Come over." I knew what was coming. The sharks had smelled the blood in the water. The renovation was done. The value was up. And suddenly, the Mercer family was ready to claim their share of a harvest they hadn't planted. They were coming for my house, but they had no idea that while they were busy ignoring me, I had been busy building a fortress they couldn't breach. The siege began not with a battering ram, but with a phone call that tasted like saccharin. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 days after I had declined the real estate agent's offer. I was sitting on my back porch, watching the fireflies dance above the newly laid sod, enjoying the silence that I had bought with sweat and savings. When my phone buzzed with Blythe's name, I considered letting it go to voicemail. In hindsight, I wish I had. "Hey, sissy," Blythe purred when I picked up. Her voice had that breathy, high-pitched quality she adopted whenever she wanted a favor. It was the same tone she used to ask for money or to borrow a dress she had no intention of returning. "I was just thinking about you. Mom said you were looking tired the other day." "I am fine, Blythe," I said, taking a sip of iced tea. "I am actually really great." "Are you?" she asked, the pitch dropping just a fraction. "Because we have been talking, Mom, Dad, and me. We are worried about you, this house thing. It seems like it is becoming a burden." I stiffened. "It is not a burden. It is my home." "Well, that is the thing," she said, pausing for effect. "We feel like maybe Grandma made a mistake. Not on purpose, obviously, but she was old. She was confused. Mom and Dad think it is really unfair that you are shouldering all this responsibility alone. And quite frankly, they think it is unfair that the family inheritance is so lopsided." "It is not lopsided," I said, my grip tightening on the glass. "It is a specific bequest. Grandma left you the jewelry and the savings bonds. She left me the house. The jewelry is worth maybe $10,000. Sloan," Blythe snapped, her mask slipping. "That house is sitting on land worth $500,000 now. Do you really think Grandma intended for you to be rich while I struggle? Do you think she loved you more?" "It is not about love," I said. "It is about the will, the legal document." Blythe let out a short, dismissive scoff. "Paper is just paper. Sloan, family is what matters. And in this family, we share, we look out for each other." That phrase, "paper is just paper," sent a cold spike through my stomach. It was the philosophy of a person who believed rules were merely suggestions that did not apply to special people like her. "I am not selling," I said firmly, "and I am not sharing the title." "We will see," she said, and the line went dead. The next phase of the assault came from my parents. If Blythe was the artillery, they were the psychological warfare unit. They invited me to dinner later that week, and like a fool, I went. I still had that small, pathetic hope that maybe they just wanted to see me. They didn't. We were barely through the salad course when my father cleared his throat. He put down his fork and looked at me with a serious, paternal expression that I used to mistake for wisdom. "Sloan," he began, "we need to be realistic about your situation." "My situation?" I asked. "You are a single woman," my mother chimed in, reaching across the table to pat my hand. Her palm felt cold. "You are all alone in that big house. It is dangerous, and frankly, it is selfish." "Selfish?" I repeated, pulling my hand away. "Blythe is married," my mother continued, as if that explained everything. "She and Rick are trying to start a family. They need space. They need equity. They need a foundation to build a life on. You, well, you have your career." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "Blythe has a real life. You have a hobby." "So because I am single, I do not deserve a home?" I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "No one said that," my father said sharply. "Do not twist our words. We are talking about fairness. Blythe needs this asset more than you do. She has a family to support. You have only yourself to worry about. If you were a good sister, you would see that." I looked at them, really looked at them, for years. I had thought they just favored Blythe because she was charismatic, but in that moment, under the dim light of their dining room chandelier, I realized it wasn't just favoritism, it was a casting decision. In their minds, Blythe was the protagonist of the Mercer family movie. Her struggles were tragedies. Her desires were mandates. I was the supporting character, the reliable background actor whose only purpose was to facilitate the star's journey. I wasn't supposed to have assets. I wasn't supposed to have power. My role was to give, and hers was to take. I am not giving her the house, I said, standing up. I spent 2 years bleeding into those floors. I paid every bill. I did the work. Where was she when I was sanding the deck in 90-degree heat? Where were you? That is exactly it, Blythe's voice rang out. She walked into the dining room from the kitchen, where she had apparently been listening. You are acting like you did it all alone, but you didn't. We had an agreement. Sloane? I stared at her. What are you talking about? Blythe crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe with a smug, triumphant smile. That night, last November, you called me crying. You said you were overwhelmed. You said you couldn't handle the payments and the repairs. You asked me to help you manage it, and you promised that if I helped you deal with the stress, we would split the house 50-50 once it was done. My mind raced, rewinding through the blur of the last 2 years. I remembered the night she was talking about. I had been exhausted. A pipe had burst in the bathroom, flooding the hallway I had just finished painting. I was sitting on the wet floor, sobbing, and I had called her. I called you to vent, I said, my voice rising. I said I was tired. I said, I don't know if I can do this. I never promised you half the house, and you certainly never helped. You told me to stop whining and hung up to go to a concert. That is not how I remember it, Blythe said smoothly, and that is not what I wrote down in my journal that night. I have a contemporary record of our verbal contract. Sloane. A verbal contract? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You are delusional. Watch your tone, my father snapped, slamming his hand on the table. Your sister is trying to find a solution that works for everyone. Why do you have to be so difficult? Why do you have to make everything into a fight? Because you are trying to steal my house, I shouted. We are trying to correct an oversight, my mother yelled back. Grandma would never have wanted this animosity. She would want you to share. If you force this, Sloane, if you make us take formal steps, you are going to embarrass this entire family. Do you want that? Do you want everyone to know you are the kind of person who cheats her own sister? I looked at the three of them, the united front of the Mercer family. They were closing ranks. They were threatening me, not with violence, but with the one thing they thought I feared most, social shame. They thought I was still the obedient little girl who would do anything to avoid a scene. They thought that if they pressed hard enough, I would crumble just to stop the shouting. I am leaving, I said. If you walk out that door, Blythe called after me, her voice turning hard and cold. Do not be surprised when reality hits you. You cannot win this. Sloane, just sign the deed over, let us sell it, split the money, and we can all go back to being a happy family. I didn't answer. I walked out to my car, my hands shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove home in silence, but my mind was screaming. They weren't asking anymore. They were demanding, and the terrifying part was their conviction. Blythe actually believed her own lie. She had rewritten the memory of that phone call until it fit the narrative where she was the hero saving the day, and I was the ungrateful wretch reneging on a deal. For a week, there was silence. No calls, no texts. It was the eye of the storm. I tried to convince myself they were bluffing. I told myself that even my parents wouldn't sink so low as to drag their private dysfunction into the public record. They cared too much about appearances. They wouldn't want the neighbors to know they were suing their own daughter. I was wrong. On a rainy Thursday morning, a stranger knocked on my door. He was a heavy-set man in a windbreaker, looking bored and wet. Sloane Mercer? He asked. Yes. Service for you, he said, thrusting a thick manila envelope into my hand. He turned and walked away before I could even say thank you. I stood in the doorway, the rain misting against my face, looking down at the packet. The return address was a law firm downtown. I tore the flap open, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pulled out the stack of papers. The text at the top was bold, black, and irrevocable. In the District Court of Travis County, Texas, plaintiff, Blythe Mercer. Defendant, Sloan Mercer, cause of action, breach of contract, constructive trust, and partition of real property. I stared at the words until they blurred. They had done it. They had actually done it. They had taken the private ugliness of our family and stamped a case number on it. I flipped through the pages. There were accusations of undue influence on my grandmother. There were claims that I was mentally unstable and unfit to manage assets. And there, in paragraph 14, was the lie Blythe had planted in the dining room. Plaintiff alleges that on November 12th, defendant entered into a binding oral agreement to convey 50% interest in the subject property in exchange for management services and emotional support. Emotional support. I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. They were weaponizing the very neglect they had subjected me to. I walked back inside and closed the door. The house was quiet. The rain tapped against the windows I had installed. The floorboards I had refinished felt solid beneath my feet. They wanted a fight? They wanted to drag me into the mud? I walked into my office and pulled the thick binder of receipts off the shelf. I laid it on the desk next to the lawsuit. They thought they were suing the old Sloan, the one who cried when they stole her jacket, the one who apologized for taking up space. They didn't realize that Sloan didn't live here anymore. I wasn't going to give them the house. I wasn't going to give them a settlement. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. A day in court, and I prayed, for their sake, that they were ready for the truth, because I had the receipts, and I was done paying for their peace. I sat at my kitchen table, the wood cool under my forearms, and read the document that officially declared me incompetent. The lawsuit was not just a demand for property, it was an assassination of my character. Paragraph 7 claimed that I suffered from chronic emotional instability. Paragraph 9 cited episodes of severe disassociation that rendered me unfit to make financial decisions. Paragraph 12 described me as prone to panic and dependent on familial support for basic life administration. It was a masterclass in fiction. They had taken the normal anxieties of a young woman renovating a house alone, the stress of a leaking roof, the fatigue of working 2 jobs, and weaponized them into a clinical diagnosis. They painted a picture of a fragile, hysterical girl who needed her big sister and wise parents to step in and save her from herself. But the real blow came on page 15. Exhibit A, Shared Ownership and Management Agreement. I stared at the page, my breath hitching in my throat. It was a contract. It was dated November 12th, 2 years ago, the exact date of the breakdown Blythe had invented. The terms were clear. In exchange for Blythe's management expertise and emotional labor, I agreed to transfer 50% of the equity in 412 Rue Magnolia to her upon the completion of renovations. And there, at the bottom, was my signature. I ran my thumb over the ink. It was a photocopy, of course, but the loop of the S and the sharp cross of the T were terrifyingly familiar. It looked exactly like my handwriting. If I didn't know for a fact that I had never seen this document before, I might have believed I signed it in a fugue state. Below my name were 2 other signatures, bold and unhesitating, Gordon Mercer and Marianne Mercer. They had signed as witnesses. The betrayal hit me harder than the theft. Blythe lying was expected. It was her nature, like a scorpion stinging. But my parents? They had signed their names to a lie. They had looked at a forged document, picked up a pen, and validated it. They weren't just enabling her anymore. They were co-conspirators. I grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, vibrating rage. I dialed my mother. She picked up on the second ring. "Sloan, did you get the—" "Did you sign it?" I cut her off. My voice was low, barely a whisper. "The agreement. Did you actually sign it? There was a pause on the other end, a hesitation that spoke volumes. Sloan, honey, you have to understand. We are trying to protect the asset. Blythe is worried that if you have another episode, you might lose the house. This just formalizes the help she has been giving you. What help? I screamed, the sound tearing out of my throat. She hasn't lifted a finger. She hasn't paid a dime. And I do not have episodes. I have a job. I have a life. Lower your voice, my mother snapped, her tone shifting from concern to command. This is exactly what we mean. You are hysterical right now, just like that night. I am not hysterical. I am being sued by my own family. Give me the phone, I heard my father say in the background. A moment later, his heavy breathing filled the line. Sloan, he said. Stop this. You are being selfish. Your sister needs this security. You have plenty. Why is it so hard for you to share? We raised you better than this. You raised me to be a doormat, I said, but I am done lying down. If you fight this, my father warned, his voice dropping to a growl, you will lose. We have the document. We have the witnesses. Do not drag our name through the mud because of your greed. I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. I just pressed the red button and stared at the screen until it went black. They weren't asking. They weren't negotiating. They were taking. They truly believed that their combined reality, the one where Blythe was the hero and I was the invalid, was stronger than the truth. I needed a shark. I didn't call the family lawyer my father used for his estate planning. I didn't call the nice mediator my friend recommended. I went online and searched for civil litigation real estate fraud Austin. I looked for the firm with the most aggressive reviews. I found Graham Lyle. His office was not in a glass skyscraper. It was in a renovated brick building on 6th Street, sandwiched between a high-end architectural firm and a bail bondsman. The waiting room was sparse, modern, and intimidatingly quiet. Graham Lyle himself was a man who looked like he slept 3 hours a night and ran on caffeine and spite. He was in his 40s, with graying hair cut short and eyes that seemed to scan for weakness. He didn't offer me coffee. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He just pointed to the chair opposite his desk and held out his hand for the papers. He read the lawsuit in silence. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic ticking of a clock on the wall and the occasional scratch of his pen as he made notes in the margins. After 10 minutes, he tossed the file onto his desk. Standard shakedown, he said, leaning back in his chair. They are banking on you settling to avoid the embarrassment of a public trial. The mental instability claims are gross, but they are tactical. They want to discredit your testimony before you even open your mouth. He tapped the photocopy of the shared ownership agreement with his index finger. This is the problem, Graham said. If this is real, you are dead in the water. Contracts do not care about fairness. Did you sign this? No, I said instantly. Graham looked at me. He didn't blink. He stared at me for a full 10 seconds, assessing. Don't lie to me. If you signed it while you were drunk, or tired, or just stupid, tell me now. I can work with stupid. I cannot work with a surprise. I did not sign it, I repeated, meeting his gaze. I have never seen that piece of paper in my life. And the date? November 12th? I was at home alone dealing with a burst pipe. Blythe was at a concert. I have the credit card statement for the plumber to prove I was home. And I bet I can find her social media posts from the concert. Graham's expression didn't change, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. Okay, so we have forgery. That is a criminal offense. Not just civil, but proving it is hard. It is your word against 3 witnesses, 2 of whom are your parents. Juries love parents. They hate believing that mom and dad would frame their own kid. He leaned forward. To win this, we need more than, I didn't do it. We need to bury them in objective reality. Do you have proof of ownership? Not just the deed. I mean proof of sweat equity. Proof that you acted as the sole owner for the last 2 years? I reached into my tote bag. I didn't pull out a folder. I pulled out a heavy 3-inch binder. Then I pulled out a shoebox filled with overflow receipts. Then I pulled out a flash drive. This is every receipt for every nail, board, and gallon of paint, I said, stacking them on his desk. This is the permit history. These are the emails with the city inspector. This is the log of hours I worked. This is the bank statement showing every mortgage payment coming from my personal account. Blythe's name is on nothing. Not a utility bill, not a paint swatch, nothing. Graham picked up the binder. He opened it to a random page. A receipt for lumber dated 18 months ago. He flipped a few more pages. He saw the photos of me tearing out the drywall, covered in dust. He saw the time-stamped emails. For the first time, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. "Well," he said, "this is a good start. You would be amazed how many people come in here with nothing but a sob story. This is ammunition." He closed the binder and turned his attention back to the forged agreement. He picked it up and held it under the desk lamp, squinting at the text. "It is interesting," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "What is?" I asked. "The language," Graham said. "It is good, too good. Most forgeries done by amateurs sound like they were written by, well, amateurs. They use fancy words incorrectly. They ramble. This?" He tapped the paper. "This cites the Texas Property Code correctly. It has a severability clause. It references consideration in the proper legal sense. This wasn't written by your sister. This was downloaded, or copied." "Blythe isn't smart enough to write this," I agreed. "She probably found a template online." "Maybe," Graham said. He pulled a magnifying glass from his drawer, an actual old-school magnifying glass, and hovered over the signature line. "The signature is a high-quality lift. See the pixelation at the edges? It is faint, but it is there. They didn't trace it. They scanned your signature from another document and superimposed it onto this one. Then they printed the whole thing out to make it look like an original. It is digital manipulation." I felt a chill go down my spine. "How can you tell?" "I have seen it before," Graham said. "But here is the catch. If they scanned it and printed it, they used a printer." "Obviously," I said. Graham looked at me, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. "No, Sloan, you do not understand. Modern color laser printers, almost all of them, leave a secret code on every page they print. It is called the machine identification code. Tiny yellow dots, invisible to the naked eye. They encode the printer's serial number and the date and time the document was printed." He sat back, lacing his fingers together. "If your parents signed this 2 years ago as they claim, the printer code will match a date from 2 years ago. But if they cooked this up last week because they saw the Zillow estimate on your house." He let the sentence hang in the air. "You can see these dots?" I asked. "I can't," Graham said. "But I know a forensic document examiner who can. If we can get access to the original document, the one they claim is the wet ink original, we can scan it under blue light. If the dots say that paper was printed last month, your sister isn't just losing the lawsuit. She is going to jail for fraud." "And my parents?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Graham looked at me with a brutal, necessary honesty. "They signed as witnesses to a document that didn't exist when they said it did. They are in the boat with her." He pushed the file toward me. "I will take the case," Graham said. "But I need you to authorize the forensic analysis. It is expensive, and it is going to declare war on your family in a way you cannot walk back from. Once we prove they fabricated evidence, there is no Thanksgiving dinner. There is no reconciliation. You are sending a torpedo into their living room. Are you ready for that?" I thought about the phone call. I thought about my father calling me selfish. I thought about Blythe's smirk. I thought about the years of being the manageable one, the one who absorbed the damage so they could stay whole. I looked at Graham Lyle. "Do it," I said. "Burn it down." The morning of the hearing, the sky over Austin was a bruised purple, threatening a storm that refused to break. I arrived at the courthouse 15 minutes early, wearing a charcoal suit that I had bought specifically for this day. It was armor, it was sharp, tailored, and utterly devoid of the softness my family expected from me. When I walked into the courtroom, the tableau was already set. It looked like a scene from a bad Lifetime movie, where the casting director had been told to prioritize wholesome family values. Blythe sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by our parents. She was wearing a pale blue cardigan over a white dress, a color choice that screamed innocence and virginity. Her hair was pulled back in a loose, romantic bun, and she was dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief before the judge had even entered the room. My parents sat directly behind her, leaning forward to whisper words of encouragement, their hands resting protectively on her shoulders. They were the portrait of a united front, a fortress of familial love standing against the cold wind of my selfishness. I sat alone at the defendant's table. Graham Lyle was already there, arranging his files with surgical precision. He didn't look up when I sat down. He just slid a notepad toward me. "Do not react," he murmured, his lips barely moving. "No matter what they say. Do not roll your eyes. Do not sigh. Do not shake your head. Let them tell the story they want to tell. The more they talk, the more rope they buy." "I know," I whispered back. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Marin Holloway swept into the room. She was a woman in her 60s with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. She didn't smile. She didn't look tired. She looked like a machine designed to process truth. She sat down, adjusted her robes, and looked over her reading glasses at the two tables. "Docket number 4729, she read. "Mercer versus Mercer. Counsel, you may proceed." Blythe's lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, who possessed a voice like melted butter, stood up. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward the center of the room, looking not at the judge, but at my parents, offering them a sympathetic nod before turning to address the bench. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice low and grave, "this is not a typical property dispute. This is a tragedy. It is a story about a family trying desperately to save one of their own from her own worst impulses." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten, but I kept my face blank. "The defendant, Sloane Mercer," Sterling continued, gesturing vaguely in my direction as if I were a volatile chemical, "is a woman who has struggled for years with isolation, emotional volatility, and a profound inability to manage the complexities of adult life. Her sister, my client, has been her rock. Blythe Mercer has provided financial guidance, emotional stability, and constant support to a sister who, quite frankly, rejects help until she is drowning." He paused for effect. "You will hear testimony today that the defendant took on a massive renovation project at 412 Rue Magnolia. The defense will claim this was an act of independence. We posit, however, that it was a manic attempt to assert control by a woman spiraling into a breakdown. Ms. Sloane Mercer refused professional help. She refused to hire licensed contractors for major structural work. She isolated herself in a construction zone for 2 years, living in squalor, cutting off her family because she was paranoid that they were trying to control her." I stared straight ahead at the wood grain of the judge's bench. They were twisting my greatest achievement, my grit, my hard work, into a symptom of mental illness. My refusal to hire contractors wasn't thrift. It was paranoia. My long hours weren't dedication. They were mania. "The document in question," Sterling said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "the shared ownership agreement, was not born out of greed. It was a safety net. It was an agreement made in a moment of clarity, where the defendant realized she could not do this alone. She begged her sister for help. She promised equity in exchange for a lifeline. And now that the house is finished and the value has skyrocketed, she has conveniently forgotten the hand that pulled her out of the water." Blythe let out a soft, audible sob. My mother handed her a fresh tissue. Sterling called Blythe to the stand first. She walked up slowly, looking small and fragile. She swore on the Bible with a trembling hand. When asked to describe our relationship, she looked at me with eyes full of practiced sorrow. "I love Sloane," Blythe said, her voice catching. "I have always tried to protect her. She gets these ideas. She thinks she can take on the world, but she crashes so hard. When she got the house, I was terrified. She was working 18 hours a day. She looked like a ghost. I was scared she was going to hurt herself with those power tools. "And the agreement?" Sterling asked gently. "Tell us about the night of November 12th. Blythe took a deep breath. "She called me. She was crying hysterically. She said the pipes had burst and she didn't have the money to fix it. She said, 'Blythe, I can't do this anymore. Please help me.' She said if I took over the management, if I helped her stabilize things, she would give me half the house. She said she didn't want the burden of owning it alone. I drove over there immediately. Mom and Dad came too. We wrote it up right there at the kitchen table because she insisted. She wanted it on paper so she wouldn't feel so untethered. It was a beautiful lie. It had characters. It had motivation. And it had a timeline. The only problem was that on November 12th, I was indeed crying over a pipe, but I was alone. Blythe was at a concert at the Moody Theater, posting videos of the encore. Graham didn't object. He sat like a statue, letting her pile the lies higher and higher. Then came my mother. Mary Ann Mercer took the stand with the reluctance of a saint forced to testify against a sinner. She smoothed her skirt and looked at the judge with wide, earnest eyes. "Mrs. Mercer," Sterling asked, "do you believe your daughter Sloane is capable of managing this asset alone?" "I wish I could say yes," my mother said, looking at me with a pitiful expression that made my stomach turn. "But Sloane has always been difficult, sensitive, even as a child. She would shut down. She would hide things. We have always had to walk on eggshells around her. When she signed that agreement, I was so relieved. I thought, finally, she is letting us help. She is letting Blythe share the load." "And you witnessed the signing?" "I did," my mother said, her voice firm. "I watched her sign it with my own eyes. She was shaking. Poor thing. She was so grateful." The courtroom was silent. The narrative was compelling. To an outsider, it made perfect sense. The unstable, overwhelmed younger sister and the benevolent, capable older sister. The parents just wanting peace. I could feel the eyes of the court reporter on me. I could feel the bailiff watching me, probably wondering if I was going to snap and prove them right. But I didn't, moving. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, breathing in for 4 counts, holding for 4 counts, exhaling for 4 counts. My silence was not submission. It was a trap. By the time Sterling rested his case, the air in the room felt heavy with their victory. Blythe looked revitalized. She sat up straighter, the tears gone, replaced by a look of vindication. Graham stood up. He didn't make a speech. He didn't offer a tearful counter-narrative. "Your Honor," Graham said, his voice dry and bored, "the defense has a significant amount of evidence to present regarding the physical renovation of the property. But first, we would like to address the foundational document of the plaintiff's claim, Exhibit A." He walked over to the exhibit table and picked up the shared ownership agreement. "The plaintiff claims this document was created and signed on November 12th, 2 years ago," Graham said. "They claim it was a spontaneous agreement drafted at a kitchen table to soothe a panicked woman." "That is correct," Sterling said, looking annoyed. "We have no questions for the witnesses at this time," Graham said, shocking everyone. "We simply ask the court to examine the document itself." Blythe looked confused. She whispered something to Sterling, who patted her arm reassuringly. As the court took a brief recess for the judge to review the submitted evidence files, Blythe walked past my table on her way to the water fountain. She moved close to the railing, her hip brushing against the wood. She didn't look at me, but she leaned in just enough for her voice to carry only to my ears. "You should have just settled. Sloane," she hissed, the sweet sister act dropping for a microsecond to reveal the rot underneath. "Embarrassing yourself like this? You always ruin things. Just let me fix it." I looked up at her. I didn't blink. I didn't whisper back. I just looked at her with the cold, dead stare of someone who has already watched the funeral and is just waiting for the coffin to drop. She shivered, pulled her cardigan tighter, and walked away. When the judge returned to the bench, the atmosphere had shifted. Judge Holloway sat down heavily. She picked up the case file. She didn't look at the lawyers. She didn't look at the gallery. She began to turn the pages. Flip, flip, flip. She stopped. Her hand rested on Exhibit A, the agreement. Up until this moment, Judge Holloway had been a neutral arbiter, a passive listener to the family drama, but now, her body language changed. She leaned forward. She adjusted her glasses. She brought the paper closer to her face, squinting at something in the text, or perhaps something about the paper itself. She looked up. Her eyes did not go to Blythe, who was smiling confidently at our parents. Her eyes did not go to Sterling, who was checking his watch. Her eyes locked onto me. But it wasn't the look of pity the others had given me. It was a look of sharp, intense curiosity. It was the look of a woman who had just realized that the puzzle pieces she had been handed were from two different boxes. The room went dead silent. The air conditioning hummed. "Counsel," Judge Holloway said, her voice cutting through the silence like a razor blade. Blythe's smile faltered. "I have a question about this document," the judge continued, her finger tapping the page. "And I suggest you listen very carefully to what I am about to ask." Judge Holloway did not look at the emotional performance my sister had just delivered. She did not look at the tear-stained handkerchief wadded up in Blythe's hand, nor did she acknowledge the stoic, heartbroken poses my parents were holding in the gallery. She was looking at the paper in her hand with the detached, clinical scrutiny of a biologist examining a specimen under a microscope. "Ms. Mercer," the judge said, her voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room, "you testified that this agreement was drafted at your sister's kitchen table on the night of November 12th. Is that correct?" Blythe stood up again, smoothing her dress. She looked confident, but there was a tightness around her eyes that I recognized. It was the look she got when she was trying to remember which lie she had told to whom. "Yes, Your Honor, that is correct." "And you stated that you wrote this document yourself?" "I did," Blythe said, nodding vigorously. Sloane was in such a state. She couldn't focus, so I pulled out my laptop and I typed it up right there. I just wanted to make sure we had something in writing to make her feel secure. Judge Holloway slowly lowered the document to the desk. "You typed this up? Spontaneously?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you have a background in contract law, Miss Mercer?" Blythe blinked. No, but I have taken business classes. I know how to write an agreement." "I see," the judge said. She picked up the paper again, because this document contains a very specific indemnity clause referencing the Texas Property Code. Chapter 5. It also includes a force majeure clause and a severability provision that is standard in commercial real estate acquisitions. The judge looked over her glasses. "You drafted a force majeure clause at a kitchen table while your sister was, as you described, hysterically crying about a burst pipe?" Blythe hesitated. Her eyes darted to her lawyer. "Mr. Sterling?" Sterling remained impassive, but I saw his pen stop moving on his notepad. I used a template," Blythe stammered, pivoting quickly. "I found one online, to make sure it was legal. I just filled in the blanks." "A template," the judge repeated. "And who printed this document?" "I did," Blythe said. "I had a portable printer in my car. I use it for my work." "And the original?" the judge asked. "The one with the wet ink signatures. Who has maintained custody of that document since November 12th? "I have," Blythe said. "It has been in my safe deposit box. I never let it out of my sight because I knew Sloane might try to destroy it if she changed her mind." "So you are telling this court," Judge Holloway said, her voice dropping to a dangerously low volume, "that you went to your sister's house to comfort her during a mental breakdown, but you brought a laptop, a portable printer, and the foresight to download a commercial real estate template, and then you immediately locked the result in a safe deposit box?" "I am very organized," Blythe said, lifting her chin. "I like to be prepared." It was a pivot, and a weak one. I watched my parents. My father was frowning, a small crease appearing between his eyebrows. He wasn't suspicious yet, but he was annoyed that the judge wasn't simply accepting their version of reality. My mother looked nervous. her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. Judge Holloway turned a page in the file. Let us move on to the execution of this agreement. Mr. Sterling, you claim this document transferred 50% ownership to your client 2 years ago. That is correct, Your Honor, Sterling said, rising. It was an equitable transfer in exchange for services rendered. Then I have a question regarding the expenses, the judge said. She pulled a different stack of papers from the file, the ones Graham had submitted. I am looking at 2 years of property tax records, homeowners' insurance premiums, and utility bills for the property in question. The judge looked at Sterling. Every single check, every single electronic transfer, every single payment came from the personal checking account of Sloan Mercer. There is not a single contribution from Blythe Mercer, not for taxes, not for the insurance that protects this alleged shared asset, not even for the water bill. Blythe opened her mouth, but Sterling cut her off with a raised hand. Your Honor, Sterling said smoothly, as we stated, the defendant insisted on maintaining financial control. It was part of her pathology. She wanted to pay the bills to prove she was capable. My client offered to pay her share many times, but Ms. Sloan Mercer refused. We have text messages where Blythe asks if Sloan needs anything, and Sloan says she has it handled. So, the judge said, leaning back in her leather chair, your argument is that the defendant was so overwhelmed and incompetent that she needed to give away half her house to survive, but simultaneously so controlling and capable that she refused to let the new co-owner pay a single dime toward the maintenance of that house? The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of a narrative snapping under its own weight. It was a complex dynamic, Your Honor, Sterling said, loosening his tie slightly. Families are complicated. Math is not complicated. Counselor, Judge Holloway snapped, if you own 50% of an asset, you are liable for 50% of the encumbrances. That is the law. You cannot have the equity without the liability. Graham Lyle leaned over to me. Watch, he whispered. She is about to crack. Graham stood up. Your Honor, if I may. Proceed, Mr. Lyle, the judge said, sounding relieved to hear a different voice. I would like to direct the court's attention to Defense Exhibit C, Graham said, sliding a thick packet across the table. These are building permits issued by the City of Austin, specifically, permits for electrical rewiring and a structural addition to the primary bedroom. Graham walked to the center of the room. He didn't look at Blythe. He looked at the judge. These permits were applied for and issued 6 months after the alleged date of this shared ownership agreement, Graham said. On the application, under owner information, Sloan Mercer is listed as the sole owner. She signed an affidavit of sole ownership under penalty of perjury to the city. He paused, letting that sink in. If Blythe Mercer truly owned 50% of the home at that time, why is her signature not on the permits? Why did she not correct the record? Why did she allow her sister to commit perjury on a city document if she was truly there to manage and protect her? Blythe's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. She turned to Sterling, whispering frantically, She didn't tell me. She did that behind my back. Quiet, Sterling hissed at her. Furthermore, Graham continued, relentless, we have bank records showing that on 3 separate occasions, Blythe Mercer asked the defendant for a loan, $1,000 in December, $500 in March, $2,000 in July. If she owned half a house worth nearly $500,000, why was she borrowing gas money from the person she claims was destitute and mentally unstable? Objection, Sterling shouted. Irrelevance. It goes to the credibility of the narrative, Your Honor, Graham said calmly. They claim Blythe was the financial savior. The evidence suggests she was the dependent. Overruled, Judge Holloway said. The witness will answer. Blythe stood there, her hands gripping the railing of the witness stand. The perfect sister mask was slipping. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a friendly face. My parents looked stunned. They had swallowed her story whole for so long that seeing it dissected in real time was causing a visible cognitive dissonance. My father looked pale. My mother was staring at her hands. I was liquidating other assets, Blythe stammered. Cash flow is different than net worth. I was asset rich but cash poor. You were borrowing money from the sister you claimed was having a breakdown, Judge Holloway summarized. And you let her pay the property taxes on a house you claim is yours. I was going to pay her back, Blythe shouted, her voice shrill and piercing. When we sold the house, that was the plan. We sell it, and then we settle up. That is how business works. That is not how ownership works, the judge corrected. Judge Holloway took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. When she put them back on, her expression had shifted from skepticism to something colder. It was the look of a parent who knows exactly who broke the vase but wants to give the child one last chance to stop lying. Ms. Mercer, the judge said to Blythe, I am going to be very frank with you. I have sat on this bench for 20 years. I have seen thousands of property disputes, and usually, when there is a written agreement, the behavior of the parties follows the agreement. She picked up the shared ownership agreement one more time. Here, we have a document that contradicts every single action taken by both parties for the last 2 years. The defendant acted like a sole owner, you acted like a guest, and yet this piece of paper exists. The judge looked at me. For a second, I thought she was going to ask me why I hadn't fought harder sooner, but she didn't. She looked at me with a strange kind of respect. I am finding myself in a position, Judge Holloway said, measuring her words, where I am beginning to doubt the reliability of the evidence presented by the plaintiff. The issue here does not appear to be the competence of the defendant. The issue appears to be the authenticity of the claim itself. Blythe gasped. It was a theatrical sound, but the fear in her eyes was real. Your Honor, Sterling said, standing up quickly, trying to salvage the wreck. We object to the implication. My client has a signed document, a document witnessed by 2 upstanding members of the community. He gestured to my parents. My parents, I thought, my parents who signed their names to a lie to keep the peace. About that document, Graham said. He walked back to his table and picked up a slim black folder. It wasn't part of the original stack. It was the weapon we had been holding in reserve. The defense has one final piece of evidence to submit regarding Exhibit A, Graham said. We did not just look at the text, Your Honor. We looked at the paper, we looked at the ink, and we looked at the invisible data that modern technology leaves behind. He walked toward the bench. We would like to enter into evidence a forensic technical report conducted by forming Special Agent Miller of the FBI's Question Documents Unit. Sterling froze. Blythe stopped breathing. My father sat up straight, his eyes widening as he realized that the peace he had tried to force was about to turn into a war zone. A forensic report? Judge Holloway asked. Her interest piqued. Yes, Your Honor, Graham said, placing the folder on the judge's desk. Because while Ms. Mercer claims she printed this document on a portable printer 2 years ago, the paper tells a very different story. Graham Lyle did not open the black folder immediately. He let it sit on the judge's bench for a long, uncomfortable moment, allowing the silence to settle over the room like dust. When he finally spoke, his voice was devoid of the theatricality that Mr. Sterling had used. It was the voice of a man reading a weather report for a hurricane that was already making landfall. Your Honor, Graham began, stepping back to his table but keeping his eyes on the judge. The report before you was prepared by Dr. Eris Thorne, a forensic document examiner with 30 years of experience with the FBI. We asked him to analyze 3 specific aspects of the plaintiff's Exhibit A, the ink, the signature, and the paper itself. Judge Holloway opened the folder. She adjusted her glasses, her expression unreadable. First, Graham said, let us discuss the ink. Ms. Mercer testified under oath that she printed this document on a portable inkjet printer in her car on November 12th, 2 years ago. However, the spectral analysis of the toner reveals that it is not inkjet ink at all. It is a polymer-based laser toner containing a specific chemical binding agent that was not introduced into the manufacturing process by the brand in question until 14 months ago. Blythe shifted in her seat. The fabric of her dress rustled loudly in the quiet room. That is impossible, she whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. I know what I used. The science disagrees, Graham continued, ignoring her. The document could not have been created 2 years ago because the ink on the page did not exist 2 years ago. It is physically impossible. Objection! Sterling shot up, his face flushing pink. This is highly speculative. We are talking about microscopic chemical compounds. My client cannot be expected to know the manufacturing history of her printer cartridges. It is not speculation. Mr. Sterling, Judge Holloway said without looking up from the report. It is chemistry. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Lyle. Thank you, Your Honor. Second, the signature. Graham gestured to the screen where a magnified image of the signature line was now displayed. To the naked eye, that looks like Sloane Mercer's signature, but Dr. Thorne's analysis of the pen pressure reveals something disturbing. When a person writes their own name, they do so with fluid, continuous strokes. There is a natural rhythm. The pressure varies, heavy on the downstroke, light on the upstroke. He pointed to a specific curve on the screen. This signature has none of that. The pressure is uniform throughout, which suggests it was not written, but drawn. Furthermore, there are microscopic hesitation marks, tiny pools of ink where the pen stopped moving, as if the writer was pausing to check their work against a reference image. And finally, the connecting stroke between the O and the A in Sloane is missing. My client has connected those two letters in every document she has signed since high school. The forger missed that habit. Blythe gripped the edge of the table. Her knuckles were white. She looked at our parents, silently begging them to intervene, but they were frozen. My father was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open, as if he were trying to reconcile the image with the daughter he thought he knew. And finally, Graham said, delivering the coup de grace, the metadata of the paper itself. Metadata? Sterling scoffed. It is a piece of paper. Modern color laser printers are designed to prevent counterfeiting, Graham explained, turning to the gallery as if he were teaching a class. They print a pattern of microscopic yellow dots on every page. These dots encode the serial number of the machine and the exact date and time the page was printed. It is called the Machine Identification Code. Graham walked over to the exhibit table and picked up a large poster board, flipping it over to reveal a blown-up image of the paper under blue light. A grid of tiny, faint dots was visible. Dr. Thorne decoded the dots on Exhibit A, Graham said. This document was not printed on a portable printer. It was printed on a Xerox Altalink C8000 series, a massive commercial copier. He paused, letting the specific model number hang in the air. And it was not printed 2 years ago. It was printed 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday, at 10:45 in the morning. The courtroom erupted in a low murmur. Judge Holloway banged her gavel once, sharp and hard. Mr. Lyle, the judge said, her voice tight. Do we know the location of this printer? We do, Graham said. We subpoenaed the records from the copy center at the FedEx office on Lamar Boulevard. The security footage from that morning shows Blythe Mercer entering the store at 10:30, accessing the self-service machine, and leaving 10 minutes later with a single document in her hand. The judge slowly turned her head toward Blythe. The look on her face was no longer one of skepticism. It was the look of a predator who has cornered its prey. Ms. Mercer, Judge Holloway asked, her voice dangerously soft. Do you have an explanation for why a document you swore was created 2 years ago in a kitchen bears the digital fingerprint of a print shop from 3 weeks ago? Blythe stood up. She looked frantic. The poise was gone, stripped away by the cold. Hard facts. She looked like a trapped animal. They are lying, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. They are smearing me. Sloane hired these people to make me look bad. She is rich now. She can afford to fake all of this. Sit down, Ms. Mercer, the judge ordered. No, you do not understand, Blythe yelled, her voice cracking. She has always been jealous of me. She is trying to frame me because she knows I deserve that house. Mom, Dad, tell them! She turned to our parents, but for the first time in my life, they did not leap to her defense. My father was looking down at his lap, his face gray. My mother was staring at the poster board with the yellow dots, her hand covering her mouth. They knew. They had to know. The evidence wasn't just suggesting their daughter was a liar, it was proving she was a criminal. Since the credibility of the plaintiff is now the central issue, Graham said, cutting through Blythe's hysterics, I would like to submit one final set of exhibits regarding the emotional support Ms. Mercer claims she provided. He handed a transcript to the bailiff. These are text messages recovered from the plaintiff's phone, Graham said. For the first 18 months of the renovation, there are 0 messages from Blythe to Sloane asking about her well-being. 0. The only messages are requests for money or complaints about family gatherings. He flipped a page. Then, on the day the Zillow estimate for the neighborhood crossed the $400,000 mark, we see this text from Blythe to our mother. Did you see what the house next to Sloane's sold for? We need to get on that deed before she sells it and keeps it all. My mother made a small, choked sound. She recognized the text. She had probably replied to it. And finally, Graham said, we have a voicemail. This was left on the defendant's phone 3 days before this lawsuit was filed. It contradicts the plaintiff's claim that she was gently trying to protect her sister. Graham nodded to the tech specialist at the side of the room. Play it. The audio crackled through the courtroom speakers. It was loud, distorted, but unmistakably Blythe. Sloane, pick up the phone. I am done playing nice. Mom and Dad are on my side. So do not think you can run to them. You are going to sign that agreement, and you are going to backdate it like I told you. Or I swear to God, I will make you look so unstable you will never work in this town again. Do not make this ugly. Sloane, you know I always win. Just give me what is mine. The recording ended with a sharp click. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and final. I looked at my father. He was no longer looking at his lap. He was looking at Blythe, and the expression on his face was one of absolute horror. It was the look of a man realizing that the monster wasn't under the bed. The monster was the child he had spent his life protecting. My mother was weeping, but silently. She wasn't dabbing her eyes with a tissue anymore. She was just letting the tears ruin her makeup, looking old and defeated. Blythe stood there, panting. The audio recording seemed to have physically struck her. She looked around the room, realizing that everyone, the judge, the bailiff, even her own expensive lawyer, was looking at her with disgust. She needed to pivot. She needed to find a new victim, a new angle. Panic took the wheel. I had to, Blythe blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. I had to do it. I promised them. I promised the investors. The room froze. Investors? Judge Holloway asked, her eyebrows shooting up. Mr. Sterling closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. He knew it was over. He knew his client had just opened a door that led straight to hell. I didn't have a choice, Blythe cried, tears streaming down her face, but these were real tears of terror, not the fake ones from before. I owe them money. I told them the house was mine. I told them I could leverage it. If I don't get the title by the end of the month, they are going to take everything. You have to give it to me. You have to. She was unraveling. The sophisticated, caring older sister was gone. In her place was a desperate, broke woman who had sold a house she didn't own to pay debts she couldn't cover. I watched her, feeling a strange, cold detachment. The big sister who had tormented me my entire life was dissolving in front of me. She wasn't a titan. She was just a grifter with a printer and a sense of entitlement. Judge Holloway stared at Blythe for a long, hard minute. Then she turned to the court reporter. Let the record show, the judge said, her voice like steel, that the plaintiff has just admitted to a motive for fraud. She looked back at Blythe. And Ms. Mercer, I strongly suggest you stop talking, because right now, losing this lawsuit is the least of your problems. The silence that followed Blythe's admission about the investors was not empty. It was heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. She had cracked the door open, and now the wind was tearing it off the hinges. "It was a mistake!" Blythe screamed, abandoning the railing of the witness stand to grip the wood with both hands. Her knuckles white, the sophisticated, pity-inducing sister was gone. In her place was a woman consumed by the frantic energy of entitlement. Grandma was 89 years old. She was confused. She mixed up the names. That house was always supposed to be mine. I am the oldest. I am the one who kept this family together. Why would she give it to Sloane? Sloane, who never calls. Sloane, who sits in her room while the rest of us are living. "Ms. Mercer," Judge Holloway barked, her voice echoing off the paneled walls. "You will control yourself, or I will have the bailiff remove you." "I am just telling the truth," Blythe shouted, her voice shrill and breaking. "It is not fair. I built my life around that inheritance. I made plans, and she just stole it because she happened to be the one holding Grandma's hand at the end. It is theft." "That is enough," the judge said. The volume of her voice dropped, but the intensity increased tenfold. "You are not here to litigate the validity of your grandmother's will. That probate window closed 3 years ago. You are here because you claimed you had a contract." Blythe stopped shouting, her chest heaving. She looked around the room, realizing too late that her outburst had not garnered sympathy. It had only exposed the ugly, jagged root of her motivation. She tried to pull the mask back up, smoothing her hair with trembling hands, forcing a wobbly smile toward the bench. I apologize, Your Honor." Blythe stammered. I am so protective of my sister. I know it looks bad, but I promised our parents I would fix this. I just wanted to make sure the asset was safe." She looked back at our parents, desperate for them to nod, to validate her. But my father was staring at the table, and my mother looked like she was about to be sick. Graham Lyle stood up. He moved slowly, deliberately, holding a single sheet of paper as if it were a loaded weapon. "Your Honor," Graham said, his voice calm and devastatingly clear. "The plaintiff mentions that she made plans. The defense has discovered exactly what those plans were. We would like to introduce one final piece of evidence. This was obtained through a subpoena of Miss Mercer's financial records, specifically regarding a limited liability company she formed 2 months ago." Blythe froze, her eyes fixed on the paper in Graham's hand, and the color drained from her face so completely that she looked like a wax figure. "This," Graham said, handing the document to the clerk, "is a hard money loan agreement between Blythe Mercer and Onyx Capital Ventures. It is dated 45 days ago." Graham turned to look at the gallery, making sure my parents could hear every word. "In this agreement, Ms. Mercer borrowed the sum of $150,000. The terms are aggressive. It is a short-term bridge loan, due in full in exactly 30 days from today, but the most interesting part is the collateral clause." He looked at Blythe. She was shaking her head slightly. A silent no. "Please, no." "Ms. Mercer listed the property at 412 Rue Magnolia as the collateral," Graham said. "She included a sworn statement to the lender that she was currently in litigation to quiet title and guaranteed she would have full ownership of the deed within 60 days of the loan signing. She promised them my client's house." I felt a cold shiver run through me. It wasn't just greed. It was a gamble. She had bet my home against her debts. "If she does not secure the title by the end of this month," Graham continued, "the loan goes into default, the interest rate jumps to 25%, and Onyx Capital Ventures gains the right to seize her personal assets, her car, her bank accounts, and the condo she currently co-owns with her husband." The courtroom gasped. It was a small sound, but it rippled through the room. My father stood up. He didn't ask permission. He just stood up, his face a mask of shock. "Blythe?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Is this true? You told us this was for the family trust. You said if we helped you get the title, we would put the house in a trust for everyone's benefit. You said it was to protect the legacy." "I did it for us," Blythe cried, spinning around to face him. "Rick made some bad investments, okay? We were underwater. I just needed the equity to float us until his deal came through. I was going to pay it back. I was going to fix everything once I sold the house. You sold my house, I said. It was the first time I had spoken in an hour. My voice was quiet, but in the silence of the room, it carried, "You haven't even won the lawsuit, and you already sold my house." "I had to," she shrieked at me. "You have no expenses. You live like a nun. You don't need that money. I have a lifestyle to maintain. I have appearances." "Sit down. Mr. Mercer," Judge Holloway ordered my father. My father sank back onto the bench. He looked broken. The applause he had given her at the start of the hearing seemed like it had happened in a different lifetime. He looked at his hands, realizing that his golden child hadn't just used me. She had used him. She had used his credibility, his signature, and his trust to cover a gambling debt. Judge Holloway turned her gaze to my parents. It was a withering, terrifying look. "Gordon and Marianne Mercer," she said. She didn't invite them to the stand. She addressed them right where they sat. "You signed the document labeled Exhibit A. You signed as witnesses." My mother let out a small sob, clutching her purse to her chest. "Stand up," the judge commanded. They stood, clinging to each other like castaways on a raft. "Did you see your daughter, Blythe Mercer, sign that document 2 years ago?" the judge asked. "Or did you sign it 3 weeks ago because she told you it was necessary to win?" My mother burst into tears. "We just wanted the fighting to stop," she wailed. Blythe said, "She said Sloan was being stubborn. She said if we just signed this one paper, the court would see that the family was united. She said it was just a formality to keep the house in the family. We didn't know about the loan. We didn't know about the money." "So you attested to a lie," the judge said, "to keep the peace." "We wanted to keep the harmony," my mother pleaded. "Sloan is so independent. We thought she wouldn't mind sharing. We just wanted everyone to be happy." "Harmony," Judge Holloway repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "You cannot build harmony on a foundation of perjury. Mrs. Mercer, you cannot build peace by robbing one child to pay for the mistakes of the other." She looked at my father. "And you, sir? You allowed your daughter to paint your other child as mentally incompetent. You sat there and let her lawyer describe Sloan Mercer as unstable and fragile. Did you believe that? Or was that just another formality?" My father looked at me. For the first time in years, he actually looked at me. He saw the suit I bought with my own money. He saw the lawyer I hired with my own savings. He saw the binder of evidence on the table, the proof of the life I had built without him. My father's voice failed him. He swallowed hard. "I thought we were doing the right thing for Blythe." "At the expense of Sloan," the judge finished for him. The judge turned back to the bench. She closed the file with a sharp, final slap. The sound signaled the end of the narrative my family had tried to spin. "I have heard enough," Judge Holloway said. "I do not need closing arguments. The evidence presented by the defense is overwhelming. The evidence presented by the plaintiff is not only insufficient, it is fraudulent." Blythe slumped in her chair, burying her face in her hands. Mr. Sterling began packing his briefcase, his movements brisk and professional, the universal sign of a lawyer distancing himself from a radioactive client. "I am ready to issue my ruling," the judge announced, "and I am putting all parties on notice. This ruling will not just address the ownership of the property. I am also directing the clerk to forward the transcript of today's proceedings, along with Exhibit A and the forensic report, to the district attorney's office for review regarding charges of perjury, forgery, and fraud." Blythe let out a moan of pure despair. My mother collapsed onto the bench, sobbing into my father's shoulder. I sat perfectly still. I felt a strange lightness in my chest, as if a heavy stone that had been sitting there since childhood had finally been lifted. I watched them crumble, not with joy, and not with pity. I watched them with the clarity of someone who finally understood that the cage they had put me in was never locked. I could have walked out any time. But walking out wasn't enough. Today, I had burned the cage down. Judge Holloway cleared her throat, a sound that seemed to vibrate against the wood paneling of the silent courtroom. She did not look at my sister. She did not look at my parents. She looked at the clerk, her voice steady and stripped of any emotion. The court finds that the plaintiff, Blythe Mercer, has failed to meet the burden of proof required to establish any claim of ownership regarding the property at 412 Rue Magnolia. Furthermore, the court finds that the document submitted as Plaintiff's Exhibit A, the so-called shared ownership agreement, is not only invalid, but bears significant markers of forgery and manipulation. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 2 years. Beside me, Graham Lyle closed his file folder. It was a quiet, deliberate movement that signaled the end of the war. The judge continued, "Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that the sole and exclusive owner of the property is the defendant, Sloan Mercer. There is no co-ownership. There is no constructive trust. There is no requirement for court-ordered supervision or guardianship. Sloan Mercer is a competent adult who has managed her assets with diligence and legality, which is more than this court can say for the parties who brought this suit against her." Blythe made a sound like a wounded animal. She slumped forward, her forehead resting on the table. The reality of the verdict was crashing down on her. It was not just about losing the house, it was about the loan. It was about the $150,000 she owed to Onyx Capital, due in less than 30 days, secured by a lie she could no longer maintain. Judge Holloway leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she addressed my sister directly. "Ms. Mercer, let me be absolutely clear. Any attempt to harass, coerce, or intimidate the defendant following this ruling will be met with immediate legal consequences. If you step foot on her property, if you contact her regarding this asset, or if you attempt to encumber the title in any way, I will hold you in contempt of court. And regarding the document you submitted, the district attorney will be in touch." Blythe spun around in her chair, her eyes wide and frantic, searching for our parents. "Mom! Dad! Do something!" she shouted, grabbing my father's sleeve. "You have to help me. You heard what she said. They are going to arrest me." For the first time in my life, my parents did not move to comfort her. My father pulled his arm away, his face gray and drawn. He looked at the floor, unable to meet her gaze, and more importantly, unable to look at me. My mother was weeping into her hands, her shoulders shaking with the realization that her desire for peace had just destroyed her favorite daughter's life. Judge Holloway turned her attention to me. "Ms. Sloan Mercer," she said. I stood up. "Yes, Your Honor." "You have sat through this entire proceeding in silence," the judge observed. "You let your sister characterize you as unstable. You let your parents testify against your competence. You did not interrupt. You did not outburst. Why?" I looked at the judge. Then I turned my head to look at my family. They looked small now. The giants who had ruled my childhood, who had dictated my worth based on how much I could give to Blythe, were just 3 frightened people in a room they could not control. "I wanted you to hear them define me first," I said, my voice calm and carrying to every corner of the room. "If I had argued, it would have been just another family fight. I needed you to see the version of me they created in their heads, and then I needed you to see the truth. I wanted the contrast to be undeniable." The judge nodded slowly. A look of genuine respect crossed her face. The contrast was indeed stark. She said, "This court is adjourned." As the gavel came down, the spell broke. Graham turned to me and offered a hand. "Good work. Sloan," he said, "you held the line." I shook his hand, feeling the solid reality of his grip. "Thank you, Graham." I gathered my binder, my fortress of receipts and permits, and turned to leave. I had to pass by the plaintiff's table to get to the exit. "Sloan." It was my father. He was standing up, blocking the aisle. His face was a mixture of anger and confusion, the look of a man who still believed he had the authority to demand obedience. "You are destroying this family," he said, his voice trembling. "Look at your sister. Look at your mother. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted? To see us ruined?" I stopped. I looked at Blythe, who was sobbing into her hands while Mr. Sterling packed his briefcase with aggressive speed. clearly eager to escape. I looked at my mother, who was looking at me with eyes that begged me to fix it. Just one last time. "I am not destroying this family." "Dad," I said. "Then what do you call this?" he demanded, gesturing to the wreckage of the courtroom. I looked him in the eye, and for the first time, I felt no fear. I felt no obligation. I felt only a profound, quiet clarity. "I just stopped being the glue," I said. I walked past him. "Sloane, wait!" Blythe cried out, lunging toward the railing. She looked desperate, her mascara running down her cheeks. "Please, just a small percentage, just 10%. I can use that to renegotiate with the lenders. I just need something to show them. I did this to protect you." Judge Holloway, who was still gathering her papers on the bench, looked up sharply. "Ms. Mercer," the judge barked, "did I not just warn you? There is no protection here. There is only greed. The ruling stands." I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the hallway. The air was cooler here. I walked down the marble corridor, my heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. I didn't smile. I didn't pump my fist in the air. This wasn't a sports victory. It was a survival story. I walked out of the courthouse and into the humid Austin afternoon. The storm that had been threatening all morning had finally broken, and a light rain was falling. It felt good on my face. It felt like baptism. I drove straight to Rue Magnolia. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was waiting for me. The yellow siding looked bright against the gray sky. The hydrangeas I had planted were bowing heavy with rainwater. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, just looking at it. For 2 years, this place had been a construction site. Then, for the last 6 months, it had been a battlefield. It had been the object of a lawsuit, a piece of collateral for a loan, and a symbol of my family's dysfunction. But as I stepped onto the porch, I realized it was none of those things anymore. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The smell of lemon oil and old wood greeted me. It was silent, safe. I walked into the living room and placed my hand against the wall. I could feel the texture of the plaster I had smoothed myself. I remembered the night I painted this room, listening to jazz, drinking cheap wine, and feeling exhausted but proud. My family had tried to take this from me not because they needed a house, but because they needed me to remain dependent. They needed me to be the manageable Sloane, the one who owned nothing so she could be controlled by everything. By fighting for this house, I hadn't just secured a financial asset, I had secured my personhood. I had proven that I existed outside of their narrative. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from my mother. "Sloane, please pick up. We need to talk. Your father is very upset. We can still fix this if you just come over for dinner. We are a family." I looked at the message, a year ago. That text would have sent me into a spiral of guilt. I would have called back. I would have apologized. I would have tried to smooth things over. But I wasn't that person anymore. That person died the moment I saw my parents' signatures on a forged contract. I didn't reply. I didn't block the number. I simply placed the phone face down on the kitchen island. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. The rain was stopping, and the sun was beginning to break through the clouds, casting long golden shadows across the floorboards I had restored with my own hands. Some conversations can only begin when you are no longer afraid of losing the people on the other side. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of losing them. I had found myself instead. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know where you are tuning in from and what you would have done if you were in Sloane's shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button so more people can hear this story.